Good afternoon. It's your friendly professor of government again. We're going to talk today in this interval about federalism. And again, these videos that I'm making are short, they're to the point, and really the purpose of these videos is to guide you toward the core or most fundamental elements of the chapter. So I'm not going to give a lot of discussion or description or explanation, but I'm going to focus your attention on very important aspects of the chapters, as well as asking you to look closely at areas that I think both the weekly continuous test and the three major tests will include. So, being that as it may, Chapter 3 is federalism. I'll try to do this in 10 to 15 minutes. You want to take a look at the definition of federalism. It has to do with a central government that is applying its power and authority and regulatory powers across a number of sub-national governments. And so if you look at the definition of federalism in the chapter, as well as the definition of confederalism and unitary government, see what the differences are. The basic difference is a country like Great Britain is a unitary government. It doesn't have states. A country like Brazil is a confederalism, has very powerful regions, regional states, and they're more powerful than a national government. The European Union is an example of a confederalism. 26, 27 major countries, all in a union, using the same fiat monetary system, the euro, and making rules and regulations about trade, transportation, and so on. But still, each country feels more powerful than the union itself. So take a look at the definition of federalism. The main reason for federalism, there's a couple of them, and there's 7 or 8 reasons, and you should know what they all are, but the main reason is to ensure that no one country can be more powerful than the smaller governments within it. In other words, it's an assurance against tyranny against any one individual being able to become more powerful, most powerful dictator, like was the case with Adolf Hitler, let's say. There's also a measure of efficiency in having many state governments. There's also a matter of dispersing power and authority across many governments, which allows the state governments to act creatively. I think the book talks about states being incubators of innovation. They are, each state's allowed to some extent, try different kinds of policies. You know, some states, for example, have helmet laws for motorcycles. Other states do not. Why is that? Well, some states try that law and they feel it's important and it saves lives. Other states like Idaho, Arizona, say, no, we don't need it. We're a wide open country. There aren't that many motorcycle accidents and so on. But different states trying different laws is important in a federalism. The 10th Amendment, as talked about in the text, is very important to understand. That the powers not delegated to the states, to the United States government by the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. What that really means is the U.S. Constitution is very small. It doesn't have a lot of regulations and rules in it, although some people think it does. It's really small, and it doesn't speak to a whole lot where, you know, if you think about every rule that can be possibly made in the universe, those are all left to the states. States decide education, they decide on garbage pickup, they decide on how to police themselves, they decide on the kinds of laws that you and I have to deal with, like in Florida, stand your ground. There is no such law in Tennessee, but there is in 23 other states. Different states make different laws based on the kinds of things that the people in the state value. And I think that's a wonderful thing that the 10th Amendment suggests. How are powers, or how is power structured by a constitution? There are delegated powers that the Constitution delegates to different governments, the national and the states. Remember, we're trying to think here about 3 different levels: national government, the many states, and then the local and the city governments. So some powers are delegated to different levels of government by a constitution. Some are reserved to one or a different level. Sometimes the same powers, same kind of power, is delegated to all levels of government, like taxation. The national government taxes us. Unfortunately, the state governments tax us. And if you live in Knoxville, you get taxed with property tax and sales and excise taxes. Sales and parking taxes, tickets, and so on. Land taxes. Wage taxes, that's the other one I'm trying to think of. So there are certain powers that are concurrent by all the levels of government. Some powers are denied. The Constitution denies state governments from doing certain things. For example, the state of Wisconsin cannot have an agreement with Canada. Any kind of an agreement that would be with any land location in the United States and another country has to go through the U.S. Congress. Same thing would be the case with California and Mexico. California cannot have an articulation agreement of any kind with Mexico. It has to go through Congress. Certain powers are denied. Other powers are denied states. For example, one state can't change immigration laws that are created by the United States. So any kind of a law that's created by the United States government that states have to work through or implement can't be changed by the individual states. Medicare and Medicaid are two programs that are run, Medicaid is run through the states. Medicare is a federal program. Medicaid run through the states, but the states can't just arbitrarily, one or another, change the law. Same thing with food stamp program, run through the states. You take a look at powers on page 77, 78, and I ask you to read the U.S. Constitution thoroughly. It's not that long. It's one of the documents on the front part of the course, you'll notice. Click on it and take a look at it. If you have any questions, you can email me, and then I'll respond to everybody with any answers you might have that may be engaging to you. The U.S. Constitution can be amended. It can be changed. There's a diagram on page 80 you want to take a look at on how that happens. But basically, there are two main ways that the U.S. Constitution can be changed. One is by a constitutional convention. We've only had one, and historically that was the first one, which created the Constitution. Another way, and the only way that we've really changed the Constitution or amended it, is through Congress. I believe it's 2/3 of Congress, both chambers, House and Senate, must pass a resolution. And if that were to happen, that resolution goes to the many states, the 50 states, and 3/4 of those states, or 35 states, must pass that resolution for it to become an amendment to the Constitution. The last amendment was passed in, I believe it was 19, well, I forget the date of it, but it was 19, I think it was, I want to say it was 1999, I may be wrong. It's the 27th Amendment, and it has to do with the Congress not paying itself while it's in session, not raising its pay when it is in session. That seems rather common and logical, but Congress has the propensity sometimes to raise its own pay. And so a student who was a candidate for a doctoral degree in the University of Texas found through studying amendments that there was one that was open on the books for 200 years. So take a look at that. It's kind of an interesting example of the amendment process. Also, there's the Equal Rights Amendment in the text. Take a look at that. That was started in 1978, and after 10 or 12 years, it never really passed 35 states or all the states, 3/4 of the states which needed to approve it. And so it foundered. So take a look at the reasons how that happened. Some of the states, because of the length of time that it was out there being looked at by the many states, some of the states in that interim of 8 or 9 years rescinded their original approval. So that had never happened before, and Congress wasn't quite sure how to deal with that. So not everything in government is perfectly understood, and works very well at all times, or is clear on how it works, it's kind of like we're developing our government even today after 200 plus years of its institution. Um, there are some very important cases about federalism on page 85 and 86 that you want to take a look at. Page 85 and 86 in your text. Let's see, we have the Marbury versus Madison case, which has to do with judicial review. You know, the Supreme Court was never given permission anywhere to determine the constitutionality of congressionally made law. It gave itself, the Supreme Court of the United States, gave itself that power. And to know how that happened, take a look at Marbury versus Madison on page 85. Also, McCulloch versus Maryland has to do with the Congress expanding its powers over through what's called the necessary and proper clause on the kinds of laws that Congress can make. Take a look at that, very interesting. And there's a few others that I think you'll find. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. Some of these you may be familiar with from civics courses you've had in high school and other places, or history, where Brown versus Board of Education, as you recall, is equal education, provision of equal education by schools. All right, so the other issues that you want to look at in federalism is how money is important in federalism. The 16th Amendment allows the national government to tax our incomes. The 16th Amendment, together with the McCulloch versus Maryland changes for the necessary and proper clause, which is in Article 1, Section 8, gave the U.S. Congress the money and the power to basically make any kinds of laws to a certain degree that it wants. That's the U.S. government. So the U.S. government became very powerful when the 16th Amendment was passed, giving income tax power, and with the judiciary's view of what the necessary and proper clause in Section 1, Article 1, Section 8 states. So take a look at that. That's kind of interesting there. And lastly, there are several themes in federalism you want to really come in touch with, likely to become an essay question at some point. Dual federalism, cooperative federalism. Dual federalism, 1787 to 1913, page 91 is where it starts. There's cooperative federalism, which went until 1964. Centralized federalism, 62 to 70. In the 70s and 80s, we have something called Old New Federalism. In 1980s and 90s, there's New Federalism. Representational federalism under the case of Garcia versus San Antonio. Regulatory federalism, horizontal federalism, coercive federalism. I mean to go fast on these. You can play this back if you want. I want you to be able to define these and be able to explain at some point how federalism from the 1780s through today has changed the power distribution between the national government and the many states. There's also something called devolution, which is, in most recent history, an attempt by the states to bring back some powers from the national government, which has been collecting power, centralizing power. Devolution is to bring back some of that power to the states. Take a look at examples of how that has happened. Some of the examples might be welfare program, food stamp program. Both are examples of devolution. Also, there are examples in the text regarding health care, like Obamacare or Affordable Health Care Act of 2010. A lot of states are suing the national government over this. And why are they doing such a thing? They're doing it because they feel that the rights of states are being affected in a negative manner, that individuals are being told to buy a product. If their workplace doesn't provide health care, they're being told they have to buy a product. That's never happened before. And so the states are saying, no, that's a state, remember the 10th Amendment, that's a state responsibility is to tell the individuals within states what to buy. Not if there's going to be any telling of such a thing, that would be a state responsibility. Take a look also at interstate compacts and how the Constitution disallows them. And then lastly, in chapter 2, I forgot to mention, just came to mind, there are some areas that are part of the United States that are not states. They are uh, commonwealths, like Puerto Rico, Samoa, Guam, and a few others. These commonwealths, because of the way the income tax 16th Amendment is worded, they don't tax their people, but they do receive all the program benefits from all the programs like welfare programs and food stamps and Medicaid and so on. That's kind of an interesting thing. So try to get a handle, please get a handle on those locations that are protectorates that call themselves commonwealths, um, and how they respond to the U.S. government. Also, there are some states that call themselves commonwealths, like Virginia, for example, but that's not to mix up with these ideas of the idea of protectorates. All right, so if you have any questions, give me an email. Again, I've gone through this very quickly, but I meant to, just to focus us on some of what's important in Chapter 3. Thank you.